Today's video begins our extensive coverage of Jean-Paul Sartre's Being and Nothingness, covering section 1. As a college student embarking upon philosophy for the first time, I found existentialism very attractive. There was something immediately appealing to a philosophical approach that seemingly offered a manner of thinking that was both profound and practical at the same time. In this sense, it's not unlike Stoicism, and perhaps it shouldn't be surprising then to find that videos focused on these two approaches are some of the most popular philosophy content on YouTube. Existentialist themes are not grounded in abstract principles, but in human experience, such as confronting the inevitability of death, wrestling with the anxious demands of freedom and responsibility, being inevitably caught up in relationships with others and the world, but also in dealing with the inevitable isolation that comes with being an independent center of consciousness. The earliest philosophical figures associated with this movement are Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, though there are, of course, forerunners who touch upon existentialist themes. It was Heidegger's thought that organized those themes that would become the focus of the existentialist movement in the 20th century. Nonetheless, Heidegger distanced himself from existentialism. He had little interest in any kind of positive program to guide practical action and was highly suspicious of the apparent existentialist emphasis on individual consciousness and subjectivity. As such, it was really Jean-Paul Sartre and his interpretation of Heidegger's philosophy that became the philosophical figurehead of the existentialist movement in the 20th century. Whereas Heidegger avoided political programs and ethics in his thought, at least explicitly, Sartre was clearly moved by a concern for ethical action and political intervention, as World War II and the political climate surrounding that time had a major impact on his thinking. Sartre achieved celebrity status as a public intellectual during his lifetime, something perhaps like Slavoj Žižek today. However, such fame is not always a good thing when considering how later generations of philosophers in France treated his thought. Though I see this changing somewhat recently, Sartre's influence is glaringly absent in subsequent philosophical scholarship. This void is not some accident, as there has been a rather fierce rejection of his thought to the point that it is difficult to find any major living philosophers who find their primary influence in him, even among phenomenologists. For example, in an interview with one of the most renowned living phenomenologists in France today, when asked, "Did you read Sartre?" referring to this philosopher's early education, he replied, "Not at all. From the time of high school onward, Sartre no longer existed. He never played the least intellectual role for me." Such an attitude is not unique to Jean-Luc Marion, but reflective of an entire generation of philosophers in France. Derrida, who also enjoyed something of a celebrity status and who was part of an earlier generation than Marion, did indicate that Sartre played a major role for me, but was a model that I have since judged to be nefarious and catastrophic, ultimately concluding that Sartre does not belong to the age of those works that matter for me. Why is there this disregard, even disdain for Sartre? Ostensibly, it would seem many see Sartre as simply not a very good philosopher. This is perhaps in due part to his making several moves that appear to be philosophical regressions, especially in his perceived and to some degree self-proclaimed humanism, with its emphasis on individual consciousness, subjectivity, and freedom. However, other dynamics were likely at play. Sartre was not a traditional academic and not ensconced within the prestigious French universities, as was typical of most major philosophers. In the chapter entitled "Whatever Happened to Existentialism" in the book Thinking the Impossible, French Philosophy Since 1960, the claim is made that his separation from the university world left him without an institutional basis for winning disciples. And I might add, though as cliché as it might be to say, that there was perhaps something of an edible motivation behind his rejection and his being ignored. What is undeniable in my eyes is that no matter how much one wishes to erase Sartre from philosophical history, his imprint is remarkably clear, though largely implicit, in the generation of philosophers that followed, as well as in his contemporaries, especially Maurice Merleau-Ponty and Emmanuel Levinas. Furthermore, Sartre's analysis of the gaze or the look, le regard, in Being and Nothingness, appears to have had an enduring influence on many thinkers outside the phenomenological tradition. He is a philosopher worth reading still, and I believe is a helpful corrective to contemporary phenomenologies that have tended to focus on what I have named a generative givenness, by which I mean those phenomenologies that have, in my opinion, overemphasized the manner by which phenomena are productive in initiating or augmenting the self's spatiality, temporality, and identity, such as what we find in the phenomenon of the face of the other, the flesh, and the event. Sartre offers rich analyses of phenomena generally ignored by contemporary phenomenologists and instead have been taken up by the likes of psychoanalysts and critical theorists. In this sense, Sartre offers a possible bridge between philosophical approaches that generally ignore each other. This is even more so the case when we consider that he's one of the few major phenomenologists who also claim Hegel as a major influence, though perhaps Hegel as received through the interpretation of Kojève. We learn from phenomenology the phenomenon, in this case the text, has innumerable aspects, revealing itself in unique ways depending upon the position of the reader. As such, the best way to get the most out of the text, besides reading it yourself, which I certainly recommend, is to hear how the text is received from several perspectives. My own approach to Being and Nothingness will mirror how I covered Heidegger's Being and Time. I'll aim to plunge deeply into the text, working through its sections in a sequential manner, gradually unpacking Sartre's arguments and concepts as we proceed. If you're looking for quick summaries of Sartre's ideas, this will likely not be the place to go. But if you are hoping to dig a bit deeper, without the misleading simplifications that are seemingly necessary for short summaries, that will be my aim here. One consequence of doing things this way is that when a particular idea is discussed, it will not be initially presented in some comprehensive manner, and we'll be circling back to these ideas several times as we proceed. To assist in retaining what we've covered so far and to help locate where we are in an argument, I'll be gradually building up a visual map of the text. This will mostly replace my typical handwritten diagrams, though on occasion I'll continue to use them when deemed helpful. Finally, I aim to let the text speak for itself, and so any disagreements and criticisms of my presentation will be more productive to our collective learning if they are specific and textually based. This means you need to read Being and Nothingness for yourself, as there is never any substitute for that. And these videos will hopefully be a helpful conversation partner along the way. Sartre begins by situating the text within the field of phenomenology. Phenomenology is a philosophical approach, relatively novel at the time Sartre was writing, that can perhaps be simplistically defined as a philosophical analysis that aims to rigorously describe appearances and their manners of appearing. This approach would contrast with epistemology, which concerns itself with the relationship between knowing subject and knowable object, and contrast with metaphysics, though certainly phenomenology maintains a close and ambiguous relationship with epistemology and metaphysics. Sartre's claim in section 1 is that phenomenology has allowed us to overcome some of the embarrassing dualisms of traditional philosophy by reducing the existent, the thing or being, to appearance itself. Now, what dualisms are these? He enumerates several. First, there is the dualism of exterior and interior. Traditional philosophy often renders the exterior to be a superficial covering that hides the secret interior reality of the thing or object. This might otherwise be formulated in terms of the distinction between content and form. In phenomenology, the appearance is reality, and he provides the example of the concept of force from the science of physics. Phenomenologically considered, force is not an invisible cause behind a set of effects, such as the acceleration of an object. Instead, force is the totality of its effects. There's nothing behind the effect, no secret invisible cause. Appearances are not some exterior mask hiding in inner being or essence, some illusion of worlds behind the scene, as Nietzsche would put it. Appearance is the essence of the thing. Second, there is the dualism of relative and absolute, and relatedly, the contingent and the necessary, or the accident and the substance. The phenomenon overcomes this dualism by being identified as the relative's absolute. The relativity of the phenomenon concerns the fact that it always appears to somebody. At the same time, the relative appearance absolutely reveals its being in its appearance. It does not refer to something else. It is not a derivative of something more fundamental. Third, there is the dualism of potency and act. A classic Aristotelian distinction, it suggests that someone's behavior, for example, is the expression of their inner character. Seeing requires the capacity to see. Acting virtuously requires the inner disposition or character to do so. The example Sartre provides is interpreting the works of Proust as in some way reflective of his inner genius. From a phenomenological approach, the act is everything. Proust's genius is not some inner ability, but is identical with his works as a manifestation of Proust himself. Fourth, there is the dualism of the finite and the infinite. This one seems to be directed at phenomenology itself as a new kind of dualism that has been produced by it. Here, the finite appearance of the object refers to an infinite number of possible appearances. Every time an object is seen as something, this apple as an apple, this cup as a cup, the phenomenon is necessarily apprehended in a transcendent fashion, wherein my finite immanent impression of a cup leads me to transcend this instance, to situate it within an infinite series of other possible appearances. A particular appearance expresses an aspect of the cup. The object is completely in that appearance, but also completely outside of it, since the cup could never appear as its complete series. Sartre returns to Proust again to illustrate this point. The genius of Proust is reduced to the finite works produced by him. At the same time, this finitude points toward the infinity of possible perspectives that can be taken on that work. The genius of Proust lies in the inexhaustibility of his text. Now Sartre raises the question, is there a problem with the fact that there is this dualism in phenomenology, despite it otherwise dispelling so many other dualisms? Sartre raises the question here and states we'll soon see if more has been gained or lost by introducing it. Now, so far, in equating the being of the phenomenon to its appearance, and thus to its appearance to consciousness, we've remained mostly within Husserl's phenomenology. However, Sartre then raises an important question. If appearing and being are in some way equated, the essence of the appearance is its appearing, then what can be said about the being of this appearing and about being as such? Is the phenomenon of being the same as the being of a phenomenon? And if the appearing is always an appearing to consciousness, what is the relationship between the being of the appearing and the being of consciousness? Are they not one and the same, or can they somehow be distinguished? Inevitably, we can see here how Heidegger's phenomenological ontology is starting to come into play here. And these questions will occupy the remaining introduction, serving as a point of departure for Sartre's unique inquiry into being and nothingness. If you found this video helpful and it's within your means, please consider making a super thank you tip. You can find the super thank you button below this video. If you wish to be an ongoing supporter of this channel, you can do so on Patreon, where I offer video transcripts and unedited materials. The link is below. I want to thank the following for already supporting this channel on Patreon. You can also support this channel by liking and sharing this video and subscribing to my channel. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, be well.